Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you all the books that I ended up reading in the month of January. So I read a total of 6 books this month and I feel very accomplished about it because one book in particular was massive and for like the most part all of them were over like 400 pages. So I feel like I did a lot of reading this month. I took advantage of some time off in between semesters to kind of focus on reading, which is really good. And I feel like they're all over the place in terms of genre. We have some nonfiction, fantasy, magical realism, historical fiction, so I get like a good variety of, genres this month. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So starting out, I first read A Promised Land by Barack Obama, and this book is honestly massive. Like, it's almost 700 pages. Like, he had a lot to say, but essentially it is a memoir of him kind of growing up, his time in the Senate, and in his kind of first couple years of the presidency. So it ends after Osama bin Laden has been assassinated. So it kind of covers a kind of wide range of kind of topics throughout his kind of life and career. So I was really excited for this. Me and my sister Buddy read this together, as well as me and my boyfriend as well. So we had like a lot of discussions about this. And so I really liked it. I thought it was very insightful and interesting. And I've always admired him, and I always like how he and Michelle in particular just handled themselves with like grace. You may not agree with everything that, their politics and everything, but you cannot deny that they, held the position like respectfully. And I found it very insightful. Like, I'm not very big on kind of some of the politics in here. Like, I don't know a lot about some of the things in here, but it was interesting learning from his perspective and just kind of all the things you have to maneuver, especially getting the Affordable Care Act passed and like all those things, and choosing Joe Biden for VP and all that. Like, in his time in the White House and describing kind of the history of there and just the different kind of things that they have set up in the White House, I thought was super interesting. I wish there were some more like personal things in here with like him and Michelle, and like the girls. I think I would have liked a little bit more kind of personal kind of things in here. You do get it sprinkled in throughout, but I wish it, like, and I know this is more focused on the politics, but I would have liked that kind of more kind of personal aspect to it. And it made me realize how much like I would never want to be president. Like, even though I can't because I'm not a US citizen, but like I would never want to be in politics, especially president. Like, I would never want to do that. But yeah, overall I really like this. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. My only complaint was that I did feel like it was a little bit long, and like some parts I felt like I kind of just skimmed over because I was like, I'll never understand these things anyway. So like, but overall, like, I really liked it, and this is volume 1 of 2, so I'm very curious to see what the second volume will kind of entail and all of those stuff. So, but overall, I really enjoyed this. So next up, this is a book that I got from the library, and it was The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, which is kind of a, I don't even want to say like it's a graphic novel. I say it's more of like a picture book. And this thing I've seen all over the internet, so I was like, you know what, I'm curious. I was able to get a copy from the library, so I was like, no money invested in it if I don't really like it. And basically this is kind of like a boy, it kind of remind me of like kind of Winnie the Pooh. And so this boy is in the woods, and it kind of represents life, and so he stumbles upon these different kind of characters. So he stumbles across a mole and a fox and a horse, and they each represent kind of different personalities of life, and how friendship and love are like the main purposes of love, and there might be challenges, but your friends and loved ones will always be there to support you, essentially was the moral of this. And I did really, my favorite part of this were the illustrations. I think they were really well done. They're kind of watercolory kind of scribbles, and that was probably my favorite part, were the illustrations, because they were so unique. And the story for me wasn't that profound, and I felt like it was something that's already been, said before, so it just wasn't something new. And yeah, I didn't think like the writing was the best, but I did enjoy the illustrations, and I think like this would be something, if I have kids one day, like I would have this as part of like their book collection for them, I would add this into it. But yeah, it was cute. Like, I don't think it was that profound or amazing, and my life has not changed since reading it. I actually forgot about it until I was looking at like the overview of all the January books. But yeah, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, mostly because I liked the illustrations, but it wasn't, you know, life-changing. So next up, I ended up reading the Tales and Teacups book club picks for the months of January and February, which was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And I had really high expectations going into this. I've heard really great things about it, so I was kind of looking forward to reading this and experiencing myself. So basically the premise of this story is that it follows this woman named Nora, who's very upset with her life. She is depressed, and she's very much contemplating, wondering what her life would be like if she did things differently, if she made different choices, if she would be happier if she had gone down that path instead of the one she's on now. So she ends up committing suicide, and she ends up going to the Midnight Library, which is a place that is between kind of life and death, and she can go and read different scenarios and experience different scenarios of her life if she had gone through with her wedding, if she's decided to become a Olympian, if she wanted to be like a scientist. Like, she could live those scenarios, and so she can decide which life she wants to live. And so I thought that one, like, I feel like it had a really good message. Like, I felt like it had a good, like, overall theme of like the grass isn't always greener, and you can't predict how your life would have turned out if you had done things differently. I really liked that message of it, and I think the author did a really good job at depicting mental health issues, especially suicide and depression. I felt like he did a good job of articulating that and describing it to an audience. However, I wasn't that invested in the story. Like, I don't think Nora was that interesting. Like, I felt like she was very one-dimensional and flat. Like, I feel like she lacked personality, and even when she's living her most ideal life of being like an Olympian and, like, you know, being on a boat in the middle of Antarctica, like, I feel like those were, like, she still wasn't interesting enough. And I feel like the life that she chooses to live is very obvious, and so it kind of takes away kind of the suspense of what's going to happen. And the writing style in here, I didn't it wasn't the best for me. Like, I found it was trying to be very like lyrical and poetic. I felt like he was trying to imitate like the writing style of Frederick Backman, and it just didn't work for me, so I wasn't the biggest fan of this. Originally I gave it a 3-star rating because I don't know, but I was trying to be generous, but now that I've thought about it, I've dropped it down to a 2-star rating because like I've come to dislike it slightly more now that I've like not invested in this. And a lot of you who have contributed to the Goodreads discussion have said the same thing, so I feel like a lot of us are on the same page with this one, so I feel a little bit better about that, about being kind of a little nitpicky with this. But nevertheless, I do think it has a good message. I just didn't really like the execution of it or the storyline or the characters, but I think it does have a good representation of mental health issues. So all in all, this book wasn't for me. So I'm very happy this month because I got through all the books that were ones that I purchased like prior to like Christmas and all that. So these are the ones that have been on my TBR the longest, so I feel very happy with this, and this is the one that I was most excited to get to out of these ones here, and it is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by B.E. Schwab. I've heard, like, I've been talking about this book since I got it back in like November. Like, I've just been talking about it, and I finally got around to reading it, and I really liked it actually. So the premise of this is that we follow Addie, who in the early 1700s ends up fleeing on her wedding day, and she ends up making a deal with the devil that she doesn't want to belong to no one. She doesn't want to be anyone's. She doesn't want to belong to anyone, basically. And so the devil kind of twists that wish into she can live forever, but no one will remember her. So she can step out of a room and come back, and no one will know that they had a conversation with her like 20 seconds ago, and no one in her life remembers her. Her parents don't remember her and all that stuff. So it kind of throws her life through a loop, and so she spends 3 centuries trying to navigate going through life and trying to leave a mark when no one remembers her. So she's found kind of loopholes in a way that she can leave her mark on the world and have like make connections in different ways. So she ends up becoming a muse for artists and musicians in that way. And so we kind of flash forward to kind of modern day, where she's kind of 300 years going into this of kind of living her life being invisible, and she goes into a bookstore one day and this person remembers her, and that turns her whole life upside down because no one besides the devil has remembered her over 300 years. So that kind of turns her whole life upside down, and it kind of goes up from there. And I would say like my favorite part of this was seeing Addie kind of navigate her life through major historical events, specifically like the French Revolution, World War I, World War II, like those eras I think was interesting, and seeing her kind of stay the same age and kind of going through all these things was interesting, and how she was trying to make, like trying to get money out of certain things or finding places to sleep, and how she's kind of learned to kind of navigate herself in this kind of situation she found herself in. Like that was my favorite part. And her dynamic with the devil Luke was very interesting, and seeing it how it progressed over the 3 centuries, and how he's wanting her to give in and finally like say she doesn't want this anymore, in order to have her soul. And so she's determined not to give in to that. So it's very much like a game of chess as they're trying to kind of get the other person to finally call it quits. So I really like that aspect of here. I just didn't really like wasn't expecting this to be so heavy on the romance in particular. I think it's Henry. I'm totally blanking on the name. Yes, I just looked in my reading notes, but Henry is the one who kind of knows Addie, and I didn't really like his character. I felt like he very much had like a woe is me, like my life is so hard, like all this stuff. And yeah, his situation was bad, but compared to Addie's, I'm like, you can't cry about what you're going through when she's been going through this for 300 years, like come on. So I didn't really like his character, and yeah, his woe is me. He very much victimized himself throughout this whole thing, and it was very irritating. So that was like my least favorite thing about here. And the romance I just wasn't a big fan of. Like I thought it was a little bit too heavy on like the romance, and I would have wanted it to be more focused on Addie and her experience. So that was probably my biggest complaint. So overall I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Despite not being a big fan of Henry and the romance side of this, I did really enjoy this book, and it had a very good twist ending, which I really enjoyed as well. So yeah, this book deserves the hype. Like I have not read any V.E. Schwab books, even though she's very popular here on BookTube, but yeah, despite that, I really enjoyed this. So next up, I ended up reading The Enigma Game by Elizabeth Wein, and this is it's essentially like a prequel to Codename Verity, but it's like number 2 in the series. So it's after The Pearl Thief, but before Codename Verity, and before Rose Under Fire, if you're familiar with kind of the Codename Verity series now. So basically the premise of the story, it follows Louisa, who is half white, half Jamaican, and so she is growing up in England during World War II, and she ends up getting a job to look after Jane, who is an elderly woman who is also a German citizen. And so she ends up going to Ireland and staying at Jane's niece's kind of pub, and the pub is located near a Air Force base that was used during World War II. And so we follow her story as it intertwines with a woman who works at kind of the Air Force field, or whatever it's called. And then we also follow Jamie, who is a character from the original Codename Verity series, who's Julie's brother, who's a pilot as well. And so one day this German pilot crash lands onto this base, and he ends up going and has this kind of Enigma machine, which was used to decode German kind of messages that were sent that were coded. So Louisa is able to kind of decipher these codes, and Jamie uses that as a way to get an advantage on the Germans, and it kind of goes off from there. And I did really love the historical aspect of this book. I think it covers such a very interesting time, and you forget how young people were fighting in this war. Like, they were basically still kids, and I always tend to forget that, but this book kind of reminded me of it. I loved getting to experience kind of the airplane fighters, kind of their experience and what they were going through, and like their surveillance, how they were doing bombings and all those things. I thought was very interesting and intriguing, and I loved getting to see so many characters that we have known throughout this whole series, and getting to see them again was a lot of fun. My only complaint was, like, I wasn't that invested in this story, like emotionally invested as I've been with the other ones, and it's just not as hard hitting as like Codename Verity was, because that one is like my favorite YA historical fiction novel ever. Like, I cried so hard over that one. Like, I was so invested in Julie and Maddie's friendship and just that emotional connection that even though I read that one like 6 years ago, like, it still sticks with me. And just that emotional kind of connection and just kind of the character dynamics didn't work out that way, although I did find it very interesting, and I loved kind of being in the Scottish setting and kind of revisiting these characters. I just wasn't as attached to it as I've been. So even though I did enjoy this, it's not my favorite out of this series. Like, I still prefer Codename Verity and Rose Under Fire so much more over this one. But yeah, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It's not bad, but I did enjoy it. It's just not my favorite. This review, I apologize, this review video is going on really long, but I guess I had a lot to say about these books. So lastly, I ended up reading The Awakening by Nora Roberts, and this is the first book in her kind of new The Dragonheart Legacy trilogy. And so I really loved Nora Roberts' Year One, like the Year One trilogy, and so I was excited when she had a new one coming up. So this one follows Breen, who is a 26-year-old woman who is living in Philadelphia, and she is very much a shell of herself. She is not fulfilling herself in her job. She is very timid and doesn't stand up for herself. And so one day she finds out that when her father left her and her mother, he was sending her money. So she finds out that she has $4 million in the bank in her name that her mother never told her about. And so she uses that money. She quits her job in teaching, which she never really enjoyed, and she decides to take a trip to Ireland to find her father. And so when she's there, she ends up kind of finding out, getting involved in a kind of parallel fantastical world that she is somehow connected to, and she is what's needed to keep that world and her world at peace, and it kind of goes off from there. I don't want to spoil too much about this because I think it's best to kind of just jump into it and experience it, but I really enjoyed this. I think this was a very good start to the series, and even though it does have a lot of the Nora Roberts tropes that make it kind of predictable in terming like who is going to be the love interest, I did think it still had a lot of twists and turns, and I didn't see like a lot of the directions it was going, and I particularly like seeing the growth of Breen and her character. I think like she had so much character development over the course of her finding herself and finding her courage and standing up for herself and like building a backbone. I really enjoyed that, so it was a lot of fun seeing that progress over the course of the novel, and I think I'm very curious to see what happens in the next one. I'm very excited to kind of continue on with the series. So like I said, this was a good start to the trilogy, and if you're looking for a kind of new fantasy series to start, then I highly recommend starting here. It was a lot of fun. So that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of the books that you read this month were and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.